From the library of the New York Stock Exchange at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution of global growth for over 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now at the NYSE and at ICE's 12 exchanges and 6 clearinghouses around the world. And now welcome inside the Ice House. Here's your host, Josh King of Intercontinental Exchange.
This morning, like many mornings here at the New York Stock Exchange, a company held its initial public offering. The IPO was a moment of celebration, marking the end of a long journey that took the company from an idea to a startup and through rounds of funding and steady growth to the Bell podium. The company's founders and executives proudly rang the opening bell, announcing its addition to the public markets. The scene was broadcast on screens around the world, and each early tick of the stock was watched by financial analysts and reporters with interest. All eyes were on the company for that first day. But what happens next? Our guest today, Mark Mader, succinctly summed it up on April 27th of this year as, and I'm quoting him here, "There's the weekend to celebrate, but then our customers want us back to work on Monday." He would know, because at that moment, Mark was on the floor of the NYSE and had just seen Smartsheet's stock open up for trading at an impressive 20% over its offering price. Well, we've always wanted to have him back, and he's back here today inside the Ice House to tell us how Smartsheet did just that, go back to work. Our conversation with Mark Mader on Smartsheet's first year as a publicly traded company and how to build on success right after this.
Cushman & Wakefield is one of the premier brands in the commercial real estate services space. We have 48,000 professionals around the world in 400 offices in 70 countries. This company, 101 years old, if you can imagine, has never been public. There's a reason they call the NYSE the big board. It's a great home for companies like us, big companies with big ideas. Cushman & Wakefield, now listed on the NYSE.
Our guest today, Mark Mader, has been the president and CEO of Smartsheet since 2006, helping grow the company from a 6-employee startup to a publicly traded company with over 1,000 employees, now serving nearly 78,000 clients. Prior to Smartsheet, Mark served as senior vice president of global services for Onyx Software. Under his stewardship, Smartsheet has consistently been named one of the best places to work, and Mark has previously been named Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year in Technology for the Pacific Northwest, GeekWire's CEO of the Year, and is a regular contributor to industry conferences and the media. Welcome inside the Ice House, Mark. What brings you back to New York City?
Well, now as a public company, we get to both operate our firm and grow it, serve our customers, but also work with investors, our public investors. So tomorrow I will be engaging with no fewer than 21 current and prospective public investors in Smartsheet.
On the day that Smartsheet listed, inside the Ice House had your CFO, Jenny Sarin, and your Senior Vice President, Gene Farrell, on talking about the company and its path to going public. As a refresher, can you give our listeners an overview of Smartsheet's technology, what you described on the company's IPO day as the neutral fabric that connects workers and the applications they use?
We're a software as a service, and we have just under 80,000 businesses worldwide subscribing to the service today. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to help teams and organizations elevate how they work. And when we talk about elevating work, it's really taking things that historically were relegated to authoring tools like docs and spreadsheets and trying to get some people out of the primitives, if you will. And the primitives is really hacking your way through your job. And what we want to do is we want to provide people a better structure for how they capture work, organize it, report it, and now automate it. And it's all in the spirit of not only being able to get more done in the day, but really slowing the game down where you can understand what is going on in your work so you can have insights and perform better.
You pride your products on their ability to open up the world of technology to the 800 plus million workers who don't yet know how to code. I'm sure that number comes down every day. How easy is it for a company to integrate a Smartsheet solution into their workflows, and why did you choose to pursue the software as a service model?
It's a noble cause, I think, to empower people who maybe don't even understand what possibilities are available to them. I think enabling somebody who is very, very technically able to perform and achieve something, that is also noble, but I actually think it's a bigger challenge to take someone who maybe is stuck. And how do you unlock that potential in them? The reason we like software as a service is there's an element of growing your business in an earned fashion. We don't sell a big contract up front and then talk to you in 5 years. You earn it every month and year. And that's a very powerful phenomenon for a customer, but also holding your company accountable. In terms of the non-technical user, we have many technical people using our product too, but that ability to serve the person who maybe isn't a coder, and while a lot of people are learning how to code, the vast majority of humanity still doesn't.
So the Smartsheet website has a page dedicated to the dozens of tech partners like Slack, Box, and ServiceNow, just to name a few, that your company has. How does Smartsheet decide what companies to partner with versus develop internal functionality?
When we looked at the market and we looked at the tooling that was available to people, how we differentiate and distinguish between sort of systems of record, things like ERP, HRIS, CRM, these are large, heavy, expensive to deploy typically systems that don't change very often. What we solve is those higher velocity, nimble things that change all the time. Feedback flows from clients, onboarding of clients, onboarding of employees. And when we looked at what we were trying to solve, we were not trying to replicate what the authoring tools did. There is Google Docs, there is Office 365. We weren't trying to displace Outlook or messaging tools like Slack and Hangouts. Those exist. We weren't trying to become a file sync and share platform. Those existed. What we were trying to disrupt was that opportunity that was not yet solved, and that is that work management piece. If you went to a normal business user and said, how did you automate your work last week? How did you develop a dashboard to report out last week? They would nervously look at you and then try and find their IT person in the room and say, well, Bob or Jane did that for me. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to spark that in the business user and enable them.
Let's you and I take a little trip back to April 27th of this year.
The day before that, we took up defense. The day before, we took up banks. But we can't take up everything because there is not enough money coming in.
Yes. There's the opening bell and the S&P at the bottom of your screen. And the big board today, it is an IPO, Smartsheet, a cloud-based business, collaboration software company.
That's the voice of Carl Quintanilla and Jim Cramer on CNBC that day. You didn't get to watch the broadcast because you're about 18 feet up in the air ringing the opening bell, and that's your finger doing the work on that bell. Gene mentioned on the podcast how surprised he was at the manual aspect of price discovery as it happened on the floor for Smartsheet. What stood out from you from that whirlwind of a day?
When I remember walking onto the floor, what I thought was things just got real. And that's a moment that I'll probably never have again at Smartsheet. And the feeling I had was one part excitement and achievement, and another piece, which was a very powerful force that I felt, which was accountability. And when you actually see the floor and you see people running around, you don't quite know exactly what they do, but you know that money is changing hands on your back. That causes you to lean in very significantly. And I think our whole team felt that. So it didn't feel like an end point for me at all. It felt like the start of something. And it was a new feeling in that we were moving beyond private investors. We were moving into now the public market. And that was a huge memory for me. And that's still with me today.
Had you been a part of an IPO in an earlier chapter of your career?
I was with Onyx Software prior, 10th employee. We took that public, but I wasn't one of the founders. I wasn't the person who came up and who really developed that concept, but I was part of the team. I wasn't in New York when it went public. So this was my first, go live, if you will.
So often as part of these processes, there's this roadshow in which you're basically filling the order book and telling your story over and over again. Was there a discernible difference for you and your colleagues from that first meeting until the last, finding your sea legs, getting your story right, feeling comfortable with how you were talking about the Smartsheet story?
We didn't quite know what to expect coming in. We'd heard a lot of stories, and it was stories from people who had been through it themselves and then people who'd heard stories from others who had gone through it. So like, okay, what's the truth? When the puck gets on the ice, the game is on, like right now. And I remember so vividly, we talked to the sales teams with the investment banks that morning, and then that afternoon, the first big meeting with a big fund. And we clicked in. Now, what is challenging in that process is how you sound on your third meeting of the day, your seventh meeting of the day, your 48th meeting of the first week.
Wow.
You better sound pretty damn excited and authentic. So that is something which is really in the sort of camp of stamina. I think the only way you get through that in a compelling way is if you believe your own story. You can't pull the wool over someone's eyes on this one. You have to believe it deeply.
I saw that you recently tweeted out a photo of the letter that former President Bush left for current President Clinton when President Bush was defeated, and he was giving both great advice to the incoming president and being very magnanimous. If you were to write a little letter to a future CEO going on a road show and eventually getting to the NYSE, what would be on that letter?
I think you have to have an element of humility to this. You have to be open to continuous learning. If you approach this as, I have a great story, I'm going to teach these folks something, I think you'll be put back in your seat pretty quickly. And I think the amount we've learned from other companies who've gone through this process, how it helped us refine our story, what we heard from investors during our testing the waters to refine our pitch, which we thought was really great initially. These are things that strengthened the story and gave us great confidence. So the advice I would give is learn from people, not only in the run-up, but while you're in process, learn, listen, adapt your story.
With the benefit of a few months of reflection from that day that we just heard Kramer and Quintanilla talking, what are the takeaways of now being a public company CEO?
People expect you to do what you say you're going to do. Part of going out was defining a story arc, which wasn't just about the next quarter, but about the years ahead. And you should be thoughtful about that story arc because you shouldn't be flitting about changing your story arc from quarter to quarter. And now that we've been out, we've had a chance to build evidence against that. We've been able to expand it as well. And it's not that you can't change, but you need to be mindful of how you enroll people in the development of that story over time if you want them to trust you and back you.
Smartsheet was part of a large class of technology companies to list on the New York Stock Exchange in 2018. So in 2019, there's now probably this large class of tech unicorns. Do you think in terms of the timing that you had going out in April was particularly advantageous? Have you sort of sensed a change in the market volatility that would make it even tougher for a company of similar size and SaaS model to go out sort of in next January, February compared to what you did in April?
I think people close to the markets probably have a more informed answer for you. I would say great stories with great customer base and great potential. They have a story to sell in many different types of market conditions. I would say going early, going in April was beneficial in that when other companies followed, our name was usually mentioned alongside of those. So from a pure marketing standpoint, when I look at why we went public, there were a couple dimensions. One was marketing, one was currency, one was transparency for our enterprise clients. But the marketing element, very helpful to go early.
I mean, they often say that when you have a NYSE ticker symbol or even a NASDAQ ticker symbol associated with your name as you're out in any kind of a client call or sales meeting, it helps that you're a public company versus in any of the various startup phases.
Absolutely. So if we're playing cards and I'm holding my cards and I'm telling you how great my cards are and I'm going to dominate you on this hand, maybe I'm bluffing you. So for all the companies out there who talk a huge game, who don't show their cards, the prospective buyer of their service needs to say, okay, are they overly zealous? Are they real? And I think the beauty about being public is that there's a level of transparency where the cards are on the table every quarter. And that is a very important balance for your prospective customer. They get to hear your story, they get to check your financials, they get to see your reports, and that there's really truth, that representation is very thorough and true.
Burden of being a public company CEO as well, too. I've worked for many of them, and if you think about the year cycle and the 4 earnings calls that come like clockwork every 3 months, maybe 3 weeks leading up to it, not necessarily for the CEO all-consuming, but there's plenty of time to say, where are we on the message? Where are we on the script? Let's try some Q&A. How do our numbers look? I mean, the burden of actually putting those numbers out there, too, so that you can be that card player and say, look, you know where I stand. It's a tough challenge as well.
It is a tough challenge. The way I answer, if you were to see me on the street tomorrow and say, Mark, how's your day going? I would say on a net basis, it's going great. Now, if you said, Mark, tell me the 10 worst things that happened today, I'd list 10 for you. Tell me the 10 best things. I'd list 10, and I'll make you bet on a net basis I'm going to have a dramatically positive day. So I always look at things on a net basis, and I recognize, and I think I learned this later in life, that to achieve something great, you will likely have to work really hard and solve tough problems, and then also have a little luck kicked in. So I never look at it as a burden. On a net basis, being public, dramatically positive. That does not mean it's easy at every turn.
One thing that you mentioned on your Q3 earnings call was that the number of Smartsheet employees has now crossed the 1,000-person mark. That's a 20% growth in a year, if my numbers are right, and has the influx of new employees combined with being a public company changed the culture of Smartsheet? 1,000 people. It's a big payroll.
It is a big payroll. It's changed, but I also, when I hear that question, I think of the things that are now available to our team. And I'll give you 2 stories. The first was I came back to Seattle, and I heard from a friend at the gym. He's probably 75 years old, and he told me about how he knows the parents of one of our marketing managers, and he had told her parents how proud he was of her. That was a really powerful moment for that young lady. That sense of pride has really galvanized the team. People know our brand more. People see that we're a successful company. They want to be associated with a winner. As a private company where the cards are held closely, the market doesn't know. So now it's in the open, and people really have that ability to build on it. The other story is about when we make offers to people. As a private company, you can offer options. So they go home to their spouse and they say, hey, honey, I got some options. How do you value those, honey? Well, they said there's going to be a big step up in value. Maybe. Well, it's confusing. Now, as a public company, you have currency, and very often public companies, when they speak of currency, they talk about acquisition. We now have currency to acquire. I look at it as currency for employees, and that is a very powerful phenomenon where you're trying to get someone on side.
So speaking of these employees and the efforts to get more of them, the right ones, inside the doors of Smartsheet, the U.S. job market is at a historically low unemployment and doesn't seem to be slowing. Let's hear this clip from CNBC.
250,000 jobs, non-farm payrolls rose by 250,000 jobs in October. The unemployment rate unchanged at 3.7%. Average hourly earnings, those were up 5 cents last month to $27.30. Over the year, they're up 3.1%. That is the biggest jump in wages since April 2009.
Non-farm jobs include coders, engineers, and other roles in the fiercely competitive technology industry. How has this impacted your ability to scale up Smartsheet, and what are some of the solutions that have worked to engage new talent? I mean, you're headquartered in a place where unemployment is even lower than it is nationally.
It is. I mean, Seattle's on fire right now, and we've expanded into Boston. We have a team in Scotland, now in Edinburgh. We just opened up our London office. So we're distributing our hiring quite a bit. What I would say, though, is we still have this amazing luxury of only needing to hire about 400 people. So if you were to say, Mark, you need to go out and hire 400,000 coders next year, I get super concerned. But I think we are still in this sweet spot of being able to be very selective, be able to spend time with people in the interview process, help them understand our purpose. Like, how do you compel someone to get excited about taking the job you're offering them? So I always remind people, we're still tiny at 1,000. Tiny. And that is a huge advantage for us still.
Are you accessible to employee number 1,000 as you are to employee number 5?
Yeah, I'm still surprised that our new employees are surprised that I personally present to every single new employee when they onboard. Every month, I have a new employee orientation, all of the senior execs do. And there's probably 5% of the population like, well, we can't believe the execs are talking to us. I'm like, what the hell are other execs doing?
What's more important?
We're a software company. People drive our business. So if you don't take the time to get to know and engage and share with people what you care about, you're focusing on partially the wrong stuff. We've also used tactics, though. We use things like Smartsheet and Workplace by Facebook to engage our population. So tonight, as I was entering the New York Stock Exchange, I did a personal video. I posted it to our internal community. An hour later, I took a picture of how the building was lit up. This enrolls people in what I'm doing today over the next 24 hours, so they're connected. But you have to be very intentional about that. I think the other thing that I really speak to in my first meeting is don't talk to me about just values. And the shock when someone hears Mark Mader doesn't care about values. Now there's this dramatic pause, ... unless you live them, right? So I care a lot more about the action than I do the adjective, right? So do you observe? Do you ideate? Do you research? Do you recommend? Do you execute? Don't tell me that you're driven, supportive, honest. Tell me a story. Tell me when you've actually done that. And I think if you can compel your team to act, then you're not just living off of a statement on a coffee mug.
After the break, Mark and I talk about Smartsheet's Engage 18 Global Customer Conference and the future of the company in 2019 and beyond. That's right, after this.
Farfetch is a platform that connects the most beautiful boutiques, brands to people who love fashion from all around the world. We have customers in 150 countries. We have 300 designers. What Farfetch has created is a fashion community. The New York Stock Exchange is such a strong brand, and we're in the industry of brands, so for us it was a perfect fit. Farfetch is listed on the New York Stock Exchange.
Welcome back inside the Ice House. We're joined by Mark Mader, President and CEO of Smartsheet. He's been catching the listeners up on Smartsheet since its successful IPO earlier this year. Mark, before the break, we were talking about how Smartsheet's workforce has scaled up to meet the needs of the company's accelerating growth. How has the company evolved since its foundings, and what are the key factors driving recent growth, non-human resources aside?
I think when you look at a SaaS business, I think we were somewhat idealistic early on. We said we're going to build this service, we're going to build something that people really like, and we're going to let them self-discover and enroll and subscribe. And while that still happens many, many, many times per month, we've also extended to say, what are some of the needs and preferences of enterprises? And some people within enterprise like that self-discovery journey and purchase. Other people want to be supported. So I would say a big change at the company is extending into that full service arena where we have salespeople and consultants and trainers, enablers to really help them achieve greater success. And that has driven a lot of our personnel growth.
Shortly before your IPO, Smartsheet made its first acquisition with the purchase of Converse.ai, a Scottish company that specialized in bots for business automation. What role do you see Converse.ai and artificial intelligence playing in the company's long-term growth?
Well, Converse already helped us in developing our bridges to the communication platforms like Slack, Hangouts Chat, Workplace by Facebook, and Teams. And what it's enabling us to do is to really bridge between our work management platform and the communication and messaging providers. And what we believe in is that if you have a business user who has religion over the tooling that they want to use, whether it's a file sync and share store application or it's a messaging tool, embrace that and enable that. So Converse has really enabled us to build those connections in a high-functioning way very quickly. On the AI side, the focus that we're investing on right now is about how to drive convenience for users. How can I use technology to suggest, promote, nudge a user either to discover something or realize something's available to them? Converse, we acquired not only technology but a team that has a really informed perspective on how we go about that.
Will gaining a foothold with a company like Converse.ai based in Europe, you mentioned earlier, that's probably the expansion into Edinburgh, also help open up more markets for Smartsheet? Do you see yourself moving throughout Europe?
As we said on our Q3 earnings call, we opened up our first sales office in London. We're going to have 15 quota-carrying reps there by the end of Q4, so heading into next fiscal year. And the way we go about expansion is we really look to establish ourselves in a market before planting flags all over the world. So we have a very healthy business stateside. 25% of our revenue is abroad today. And what we're now looking to do from that London base is to build that success that we saw in the U.S. with really an in-market team.
Do you do that by starting with planting some of your successful U.S. folks in London to train the folks up and get them comfortable with your culture and approach?
Absolutely. We did that in Boston. We took a team of folks from our Seattle team. Some people moved permanently. Other people moved for 6 to 9 months, and we're doing the same thing in London.
But even with the move into London, Boston, Edinburgh, you and the company are deeply committed to Seattle. Beyond the ability to commute to work in a Sea-Doo, why is the Pacific Northwest the ideal headquarters for a tech company?
Partly it's a function of that's where a lot of us started our professional lives. So we didn't transplant to Seattle. You look at the founding group, the early group, we were based there. Now, we are mighty lucky that it is this huge center of gravity around cloud, around tech, around productivity. So those were things, we were huge beneficiaries of that. And we're excited about being that next foundation stone in that.
Recently, you and the other Smartsheeters welcomed a couple thousand clients and partners to Washington for Engage 18. I was remembering talking to your team when they were here for their IPO, talking about it. The second instance of Smartsheet's annual Global Customer Conference. Let's hear just a little clip from it.
I also decided that when I went on these expeditions, I would do these climbs under my own terms, but I would listen to the mountain as well, because ultimately you have to take in all the information that the mountain is giving you, the environment, the weather, the wind, the snow. Ultimately, the mountain decides what you get to do, and you have to listen to that. I call that listening to the mountain.
That was climber Ed Vestiers, and those who've read John Krakauer's Into Thin Air know him very well as one of the great climbers of Everest over the years. He was one of your keynote speakers. Who or what is the mountain that Ed is talking about, and what was he trying to get the audience to focus on?
Well, I think we talked about trying to elevate our game, and I think it was quite appropriate to hear Ed open up our conference when we talk about reaching further, challenging yourself. He talked also about climbing in the context of teams and the understanding that it's not just you. It's like, how do you work with people with different skills and perspectives to achieve a really formidable outcome? So again, he was a tone setter for the conference, and he's actually an ambassador for us now representing.
So talk to me about Engage, and how's it grown from 1 to 2?
It did. We had about 1,000 customers in our first year, and heading into the second year, I said we have got to avoid the sophomore slump. We cannot fall on our faces the second year. I mean, the first year was off the hook. We had customers coming up to us. They were more passionate about Smartsheet than we were. They were talking about how they were using it in manufacturing, education, drug discovery, and we're like, holy smokes, we got to get our engineers connected to these people so they understand what the heck they're building and what they're powering in the field. So we decided to double that up in the second year. So we had over 2,500 people present at Engage 18. And I got to say, some of the most powerful moments from that were not necessarily the big cap companies for whom we're doing amazing stuff. I was in the dinner line, and a guy came up to me, tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "Mark, I'd like to share my Smartsheet story with you." He said, "I'm one of your few attendees from Alaska." He said, "Do you know what I do?" I had no idea. He said, I use Smartsheet to help manage the preservation of language within remote tribes in Alaska."
Wow.
It has nothing to do with about making a dollar. It's about him and his community trying to help tribes of, in some cases, fewer than 100 people, preserving indigenous language. That is a noble cause. So when I connect that story around how he's using our forms technology to capture knowledge about which tribes to enable and support, like, I remember that story. And I'm a big believer that if you're story-driven and you connect with one of your engineers and say, the reason we're building this is to not only help the world's largest airline or one of the world's largest coffee companies, we're helping people in need, like, that developer will think of it when they're writing code. And that's what Engage did for us. It connects us to our customers so well.
Did you ask him how a person who is engaged in an activity you'd think might be handled on pen and paper found Smartsheet in the first place? I mean, how did he become a user of yours?
Well, that's the beautiful thing. There are no boundaries to who can find us. Every month, we have well over 100,000 people in over 100 countries trialing our stuff. So guess what? People talk. If one person's successful and they mention it to their friend, that person will try. So whether it's through an advert, whether it's through content we produce, whether it's through viral growth because our product can be shared freely without paying a collaboration tax, these are all mechanisms to get people exposed to it. And that has now built now that we're much bigger.
What were some of the takeaways from Engage, and how does closing the customer feedback loop, like the story you just told, help your teams set priorities for ever new solutions that you're developing for next year and beyond?
Well, the really cruel thing about the job, the really, really cruel thing is that the things that people want us to do, it comes in such volume.
Yeah.
Thousands of pieces of feedback. That's not like maybe a few thousands a month. What we do is we try to get a sense for not only what new ideas are coming in, but what's the vote? How many votes are coming in on certain dimensions? And then how do we invest in either enterprise class command and control and provisioning features versus the most simple onboarding, making the experience better for a collaborator. So the choices that we have to make, it's tough, but the customers really help shape that prioritization framework. And again, Engage is an important mechanism because when you're looking into the whites of someone's eyes and they're telling you how important it is, that sometimes isn't translated as well in email.
So as we are at the start of a new year, at the end of one year and the start of a new year, what are the trends that you are most focused on at Smartsheet and across the tech landscape?
There's sort of multiple stages of helping someone elevate. One is around better organization and making sure their data is consistent, correct, and reported out on. The next step, which I would say has been almost viewed as unattainable by most, is now that you have a mechanism for doing this in a consistent manner with others, how can you slow the game down further? And by slowing it down, it might seem counterintuitive to wanting to be more productive, but how do you automate certain things that let you focus more time on the things that matter? And oftentimes people think about productivity as, hey, if I could get you that 1 hour back, in that 1 hour, be really innovative. It's like that's not the way innovation works. How I view it is if we can help people manage that information in a more calm, methodical manner, they will actually have better insights as they're doing the work. It's not like innovation hour. It's getting time back while you're working on their project or program.
As you said at the beginning of our conversation, you're here to talk to investors. Wall Street tends to focus solely on a company's output goals, sales, revenue, income, et cetera. But what are Smartsheet's input goals for 2019, and how will you judge success moving forward with the people who matter most, these 1,000 employees of Smartsheet?
Yeah, I think the input goals, we're also pretty clear about not sharing our playbook. So if you were to say, Mark, it looks like your sales are really working well, how do you actually engage with your customers? I will not tell you. These are things that we've earned over the course of 6 years leading up to going public. We're refining them. But the input goals, you make a good point there. We have to look at what are leading indicators, what are themes that we're seeing that are influencing our objectives and key results that we strive for. Now, while the street wants to hear that, and they want to hear that incorporated into your story arc, there's still this intense focus on the output, right? So tomorrow will be mostly about output, actually. It'll be talking about what are the output goals, what are those metrics that we should key off of to see if your business is healthy and your story arc is actually holding together. So part of those things are, to what degree are we increasing the number of customers for whom Smartsheet deeply matters? So what does deeply mattering mean? That is some level of contribution that's significant. So as you heard on our earnings calls, we talk about the number of companies contributing over a certain level of ARR, annual recurring revenue. And that is a sign that the street sees as they are ascending at scale within certain organizations. And I would say a company that serves 1 million customers, collecting $10 a year, may not be as relevant or matter as much as a company that is serving people in more significant ways.
Well, good luck with all the meetings and good luck with the second 6 months of being a public company as we approach that anniversary in April. So happy that you chose the New York Stock Exchange, that you're one of our listed companies, and that you're part of our NYSE community.
Thanks so much.
That's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Mark Mader, President and CEO of Smartsheet. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or a question you'd like one of our experts to tackle in a future show, email us at icehouse@theice.com or tweet at us at NYSE. Our show is produced by Pete Ash and Ian Wolfe, with production assistance from Ken Abel and Stephen Portman. I'm Josh King, your host, signing off from the Library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell, a solicitation of an offer to buy any security, or a recommendation of any security or trading practice. Some portions of the preceding conversation may have been edited for the purpose of length or clarity.